Namaste to everybody. So I will be explaining briefly from the genesis how Shakta Tantra came about and how it is practiced in today's times. It will be a brief history. So at the very beginning of there are various scholarly opinions of how Tantra came about. Some people tend to believe that it was a parallel path along with the Vedic path and things like that. But what the evidence that we have as of now very clearly indicates that um, in the earlier half of the last millennium in Kashmir, where there was the first what is known as the Shaiva Tantra uh, systems of Kashmiri Shaivism, and the tantric aspects of that were developed. From that, there was an offshoot, at least of. And now I'm not going into the details of Shaiva Tantra because this talk is specifically about Shakta Tantra. So in Shaivism, Shaiva Tantra, there were at least a few divisions, few parallel lines of development in which there was one stream of scriptures and practices that were related to Bhairava as the supreme deity. And these were known as the non-dual tantras. Non-dual because eventually it comes to the position where the upasaka feels a oneness with the deity. So that's way, in that sense, it is non-dual. Mind you, it is not to be confused with the Advaita Vedanta of the Vedantic stream. There are certain philosophical and practical differences in the paths. But from the Bhairava Tantras, eventually an offshoot came about. Offshoot in the sense that it was believed that as the Bhairava Tantras progressed, well, Bhairava was the central deity in the Bhairava Tantras. So eventually it was believed that from Bhairava, it's a more esoteric path, a more exclusive and faster and perhaps a more beneficial path was worship of the Shakti of Bhairava. Shakti of Bhairava is where Shakta Tantra comes in for the first time. And that included, worship of different forms of the goddess, uh, whether it's Kali, whether it's Tripur Sundari, and there were various other more complex forms that used to be worshipped along with the pantheon of yoginis, etc. And in doing so, they derived a lot of practices which were there in the earlier Pashupat Shaivism, in the earlier Kapalika Shaivism, etc. And they integrated that along with a uh, new method of sadhana. Method was basically the idea was that uh, while there is a certain amount of rules and regulations that we follow in normal society and normal life, in this stream of Shakta Upasana, and Shakta Upasana had its own variations and substreams, etc. So one of the aspects was that it integrated those elements which are considered as more heterodox, that is not considered as a part of the normal Vedic pantheon of worship, Vedic system of worship, to put it that way. So there used to be use of, for example, one of the older texts mentioned that for certain practices of Bhairava, you can even offer ritually sanctified alcohol to the deity, which is completely abhorrent to the standard Vedic path of worship. So that was one stream from where the Shakta Tantra developed. Parallelly, there was another stream that developed from the eastern India, perhaps around the temple of Kamakhya, where a very specific kind of Shakta Tantra known as the Kola system, the Kola Tantra came about. So eventually what happened, all of them got intermingled. Perhaps around 10th century onwards, worship of Shakti as a primary deity instead of just Shakti as a projection from Shiva, which was the original conception of Shakta Upasana in the Shaiva Tantra. Here, Shakti becomes the primary deity, the main Ishta who has to be approached for all material as well as spiritual benefits of the Upasaka. Around 9th, 10th century, it started off as an own stream of its own, along with a lot of scriptures that were written after that, and those which we specifically known as the word Tantra today. So, Tantra is a specific technique of worship. That is where Tantra differs from everything else. So, it is not necessary, it's not enough to have only, look at system of worship as merely a form of bhakti movement, as having devotion to the deity, which is of course there, that is a primary prerequisite, no doubt. But where Tantra differs is that there is a certain amount of technicality in which the Upasana is approached, in which the deity is approached. one of the primary things in the tantric scriptures, as opposed to, for example, the Puranic scriptures, which is more mainstream religious currents that we had in India, is, for example, you'll see that there is very little about the history of the, not just history, or how would you put it, very little about the stories of the gods, stories of the deities. If you look at a Purana related to a specific deity, you'll find it'll start off with when creation happened, then what are the different plays, the leelas that the deity has performed, etc., etc. Then you will have sections on different lineages of divine beings, rishis, or kings, etc. Tantra, on the other hand, a typical tantric text does not go into the history of the deity too much. It straight away will start with a section which tells you why guru is important, what are the lakshanas of a guru, what are the lakshanas of a disciple, what is the system of entry into the tantric path. So that means what are the requisites and methods of diksha, and then it goes straight into the upasana of the deity. Because of this reason, the tantras, specifically the Shakta tantras, were regarded as a path of upasana, path of sadhana, more than the philosophical aspect. So it is important to mention here that while there was initially a very broad, it started off with that same philosophical base on which Shaiva Tantra of Kashmir was there, the 36 tattvas of Kashmir of Shaivism was also there. Eventually, it resulted more on the focus of sadhana actually than contemplation of the philosophy. We find evidence of this from texts around 15th, 16th century, which, for example, there's a very interesting statement in one of the tantras of 15th century, which states that there is Shiva and there's Parvati speaking, and there's Parvati asking Shiva that of the 6 different philosophies that is there, the 6 main philosophies of dharma that is there, which of them is the most accurate one? And Shiva just says that the 6 philosophies have been made to confuse people so that they keep arguing which of them is greater. Instead of that, if you keep practicing the upasana and you enter into a state that is beyond the normal mind, then you yourself will see the reality as it is. This, in effect, was the basic idea on which the basic concept on which the way in which progression of tantra happened. So it's not that there was no philosophy, but philosophical aspect was considered as secondary to the actual practice of the system. So as you practice, it causes a change inside you, it causes a change in your mind and your perspective of things. And as the changes happen, therefore you will also understand how what exactly is a deity, how you relate to the world, how the deity relates to the world, what is the supreme state that you have to reach, etc., etc. And if someone asked what is the final aim of the tantric process, it was as simply as you may put it that the standard idea of moksha, liberation, is of course there, but here there are various states of liberation possible. So at the initial very old tantras, they do mention, for example, that it's when the deity actually enters into the upasaka and stays within the upasaka. So the upasaka is basically no more just a human being. He becomes the deity in effect, in the consciousness, in his mind. That is the highest state, because in that state, like a living deity in this world, you are free from the bondages, you are free from sorrows and sufferings and things like that, and you have a superhuman consciousness. So this was consciousness is sort of the rough English equivalent of what was being aimed at. And to attain that, the primary deity that the tantras looked at was some or the other form of the divine mother. Now, by the Middle Ages, practically there were 2 divisions of tantras, though there are other. Initially, right at the beginning, you have the idea that there are Lord Shiva has 5 different faces. So from each of these 5 faces, there is one stream of tantra that comes out, one stream of mantras, and not just the tantra; it's the mantras of the deities that come out, all the 5 faces. So together, they produce about 7 crore total mantras, and each of these mantras are a deity in itself. So that was the primary idea. So this is the second difference you'd find in tantric approach versus, for example, in the Puranic approach to a deity. In the Puranic approach, you have the deity, you have a vigraha of the deity, there are certain upacharas you can do, certain stotras, etc., various things. In the tantric approach, the primary thing is the mantra of the deity. Mantra, in fact, one of the tantras very beautifully mentions that the mantra is the child of the guru, because the guru is the one who gives you the mantra and the deity is the child of the mantra. So basically, as you keep serving the mantra, which means basically you do upasana of the mantra, it's another way of getting closer to the deity. And there has to be this belief becomes sanguine as one enters and goes deeper into the path of tantra, that there is absolutely no difference between a mantra and a deity, which also means that if you make slight modifications in the mantra, therefore the form of the deity also changes. So all these technicalities were there, and still they're not where, it's still there, very much present in the tantric system. Eventually, in practice, what happened is tantra got sort of practically bifurcated into two broad streams. One was what is known, practiced in eastern India more popularly, which is called the Kali Kula, and one which is practiced in southern India, which is more popularly known as the Sri Kula or the Sri Vidya system. Uh, in both of these, the primary difference was that the central deity whom you're trying to approach is different. Here in Kali Kula, as the name suggests, it's Kali who's the main deity whom somebody is trying to approach, where there is in Sri Kula, it is Lalita Trikur Sundari who's the main deity. And along with approaching the deity, for example, when somebody says Kali Kula, it doesn't necessarily mean only Kali. It also means there are auxiliary deities who have to be worshipped in order that one can reach higher into the upasana of Kali. Same applies for Sri Kula also. There are auxiliary deities who have to be worshipped in order that one can go into the upasana of Lalita Trikur Sundari. The second and one of the most vital concepts, systems in place which makes Tantra different from the other streams is the absolute necessity of initiation in Tantra. So there is a basic krama, step by step gradation of sadhana that is present in the Tantras. So depending on the caliber of the Upasaka, initially he enters into the Tantric stream through what can be called a mantra upadesha, which some qualified individual or guru or somebody gives him or her. As he keeps doing the mantra upadesha, then comes something that is known as the Abhisheka Diksha. Now, Abhisheka is basically a kind of ritual where there's sanctified water, and then there is those water has to be sprinkled on the upasaka, and there are parts of the tantras which are recited by the guru during that time. And sometimes the process can take up to a few hours. Depends on, there are variations in different sampradayas. In one sampradaya in North India, it may start in the morning, say 7, 8, and the whole Diksha process comes to an end at midnight. So this is known as a Shakta Abhishek Diksha, where the Guru is actually infusing some of the Shaktis of the various deities into a sanctified water, and with that water, he is transmitting that energy into the Upasaka. Now, this specific Diksha is considered to be very, very important in Shakta Tantra. In fact, so important that Shiva mentions that to enter into the Upasana of Shakti through the Tantric path, Abhisheka Diksha is mandatory. It's in Tantra is not just Shakta Tantra. There is also Shaiva Tantra. There is also Vaishnava Tantra, and at one point we had tantric practices related to Ganpati and other deities also. Each of the deities had their own tantric systems. However, it is only in the case of Shakti Upasana that Abhishek Diksha becomes very important. In the case of the other deities, whether it is Shiva or whether it's the other deities, it is not absolutely mandatory. That is what some of the tantras declare. So, given that, after the Shakti Abhishek, then the Upasaka is supposed to do the sadhanas that is given to him by his guru. And as he keeps progressing, as he does the sadhana, it causes a certain change in his mind, in the way he looks at things, in his, to put it another way, in the tattvas inside his body. And when he's fit for it, when he has the adhikara for it, the guru will give him the higher levels of diksha. Like this, there's a gradation of dikshas in formal mainline tantra, and I'm only talking about mainline tantric systems. I'm not talking about, there are various folk tantras and other things you'll find in other many places, etc. They may or may not follow all the systems, but those sampradayas, and there are many like that, which still follow mainline tantra, they ensure that there is a ascending order of dikshas, and each of the dikshas depends on the state of the upasaka. So it is not a given that if you have the first level of diksha, which is the, say, Shakta Abhishek Diksha, you will get perhaps later on the next stage may come as a Purna Abhishek Diksha. You will get a Purna Abhishek automatically. It is not mandatory like that. Beyond Purna Abhishek, there is in Kali Kula, there is the Krama Diksha, where there are, all the Mahavidya Kramas are allowed to be worshipped. Then there is Samrajya Diksha and various other Dikshas, until finally there is something called the Purna Diksha and all that. But very rarely an individual is asked even, or is necessary for an individual to have all the levels of Diksha. Sometimes it is possible, and in fact it was designed this way, that an individual may progress up to a certain level in this lifetime. In the next lifetime, he may get the opportunity for the next level of Diksha. And if his Upasana is correctly done, nature itself, the deity itself will provide the opportunity wherever he or she may be born. That, you enter the path again and then you go ahead with your sadhana. Along with this, there is also the basic idea of what is known as the various modes of Upasana, which is called the Achara. In this, the Tantric system looks at the Vedic system of Upasana, which is the standard Upasana system that most of India follows, as the Vedachara, they call it. Vedachara is the primary, the first basic idea, which everybody can do. Beyond the Vedachara, there is the Vaishnavachara. Beyond the Vaishnavachara, there is the Shaivachara. Then beyond that, this is where comes Dakshinachara. Dakshinachara means basically you do the sadhanas, you do mantra sadhana, you use yantras and various, there are also mudras, nyasas and various things which the guru himself will teach the disciple depending on what deity he is worshipping. This is where proper tantric upasana starts, from Dakshinachara. Beyond that, there is something known as the Vamachara, which is basically, Vama means the left side. So the same upacharas, but only in the reverse order of things, which means this is where you will have entry of things like the controversial sort of those who are not in the system, the Panchamakara, the five makaras that are used, the offerings of um, alcohol can be given to deities, offerings of meat can be given to deities, to fish and various things. But these offerings are very ritualized offerings. It's not as simple as just getting something and offering. In fact, it requires purification. It requires a whole lot of processes before these ingredients and these specific ingredients can be given to certain deities, and they produce tremendous results if it is correctly done. Beyond that, there is the Kolachara, which is the, in between there is another Siddhantachara, but finally there comes the Kolachara, which is considered as the pinnacle of Tantric Upasana, and it's an entirely monistic system, which means that true Kolo is one who sees the deity he's worshipping, the Ishta, the form of Shakti is worshipping, as present in everything, all the three gunas, which is the deity is present in Sattva Guna, Rajaguna, Tamaguna. And until and unless an Upasaka is able to see the play of the deity in all the three gunas, he has not completed his sadhana. This is a rare state and a very difficult state. Though it is true that perhaps in general degradation of sadhana processes that has happened over the years, there may be various systems where one can get a Kolo Diksha very easily these days. But the original manner in which it was supposed to happen is that one after the other you go and you finally reach the Kolo Diksha stage, and the Kolo Diksha stage you enter into a state where you can see the deity working everywhere, and then you also go beyond the three gunas. You go to the state of the deity, which is Trigunatita. She herself is not bound by the three gunas, and you enter into a state of complete oneness with the deity. So this, in short, is how the Tantric Upasana happens, which it is important to remember that the Diksha Krama is very important. Tantra cannot be done without Diksha. It cannot be done by looking at books. It cannot be done by, I'm not talking about other systems. They may have their own processes, but Tantra from anywhere else other than a living guru who is part of a tradition, it simply cannot be learned so easily. One can start off a little bit, but eventually you'll have to enter somewhere or the other. You have to make an entry into the streams. That is where it is. And the second is the tantric system follows. It's very key to look at the tantric upasana of a deity as the mantra. The mantra is the most important thing. It's closer to the upasaka than everything else. You serve the mantra, and the mantra in turn gives you something back into your life. So these two fundamental approaches are very, very important in any upasaka who feels that tantra is the right approach for him or her and enters into the path. And beyond that, there is of course the Mahavidyas, which came in later on, sort of, the Mahavidya upasanas are very interesting and important part of Tantra. And Mahavidya sadhanas definitely require certain level of diksha and certain competency in the upasaka. The same deity can be worshipped as a Mahavidya as well as worshipped as a normal, with a certain degree of bhakti and all that. But Mahavidya upasana, the moment you use the term Mahavidya, it has very specific technicalities involved in it. specific mantras, specific nyasas, specific systems in place that has to be applied. Only then it becomes a true Mahavidya sadhana. So this in brief, very briefly speaking, this is how Tantra is, and this is still how it is practiced even today, both whether it's Kalikula in the north and whether it's, Srikula in the south. And apart from that, there is also the Shabad Tantra system, but Shabad is not necessarily Shakta Tantra. There are various other deities who are invoked in Shabad Tantra. So I won't go into the Shabad system in this. So I suppose let's take some questions now.
Rajeshri, if I may actually start with my first question,
yes,
which I was indicating towards at the beginning of, before we started the talk. So we had a speaker, Anand Venkatraman, and he spoke on interpreting Tantra as subjective neuroscience. This was maybe in 2019 sometime.
Right.
And through the course of his talk towards the end, he actually mentioned that he'd read a book by Dr. Subhash Kak called The Gods Within. And then he talked about that of referring to Shankar Bharadwaj Khandavali's work, who's the editor of Hindupedia and also writes a lot on Tantra, that deities are not beings out there somewhere. They are basically mantras, which is what you repeated as well. And they're a portal to access different parts of your brain, your physical, physiological structure of the brain, which opens up with the practice or japa of a mantra. So are deities real? Are they beings beyond the realm that we live in? Or are they simply energies which we get access to by their worship or by the japa of a mantra or vigraham?
So let me give a small example. Suppose you are here and there is the world around you, and you are looking at the world and you are understanding, and suppose you put on a certain contact lenses, suppose those who have spectacles or something. Suppose a contact lens is a little fancy contact lens. I don't know if such a thing is available in the market, which has a certain color tinge, blue or something. So you wear that and you look at the world, regardless of whether the world outside exists or does not exist. To you, the world is going to look in that, say it's a blue colored lens, it'll look blue to you, or it's a yellow colored lens, it'll look yellow to you. Now, this question, this dichotomy that you see, whether the deities are inside or it's unlocking some potential inside you, or whether they're outside, is mainly because you are imagining at the beginning that there is an outside objective world and there is you, who is a subjective entity. But your interaction with the world at every time is also changing certain things inside your consciousness. Your Chaitanya is interacting every moment with the world around you. And because of the interaction, it is taking feedback, it is reacting. So it is having it's coloring your perspective of how the world is. So this is, I'm saying, at the beginner level. And at the highest level of, if you look at it, the philosophically, the highest siddhis that you attain. And by siddhi, I don't mean just a miraculous power where an individual becomes a very high level upasaka and becomes one with the universe. Suppose you become one with the universe. I'm just literally saying that, and not in a figurative way, but literally your consciousness expands. Your Chaitanya goes to the level where you feel an actual oneness with the universe. So the question, is the deity inside you or outside you? It becomes a meaningless question, because you are the universe, and you are the universe not in just a a very limited sense of the term. You are the universe in a practical sense. It is very much possible. I'll admittedly, it's rare. It's not so easy for everybody, but it's possible. There are people who have done it at the very high levels of tantric upasana and tantric siddhis. You may find, for example, there are stories, and some of them I had seen with very great upasakas. The individual may be sitting here at one moment, somebody else sees him at another different place, another person sees it at another different place. How is that even possible? But whether it is doing or not doing, first thing is that, is it real or not? Yes, 2-3 people are actually having an experience that is absolutely extraordinary and beyond normal. So if that kind of a change is possible in a human being, it is also possible at a very high level, those who are capable of it, where the universe becomes one with you. And at that state, the question that whether the deity is inside or outside is meaningless. From a practical point of view, though, when you're doing the sadhana, it is very, very good to think of the deity both first as outside. Why? That is because you will see changes. And I'm this is a thing that is not that difficult also to attain, because there are many upasakas, and some experience of the other of the deity will come to you if you do it correctly, and if you have slight amount of capacity. And that experience initially is not going to be only an experience internally, that I'm sitting and doing japa and I feel a lot of bliss. वो सब ठीक है. You will also feel, you will also see that deity, and you will see that it is not a figment of your imagination, because when a specific deity comes, he or she has a specific nature. It will also cause certain changes around you, practical changes. It is very important. In fact, that is one of the ways in which you realize that your sadhana is actually going to some level. And to put it in another way, let's keep deities aside for a moment. It's difficult, it may be difficult for a lot of people to actually access a deity. Much more easier than accessing deities, for example, is accessing what is called spirits, whether they're lower level entities, because they are more bound to the earth, to put it another way, and also they are more gross than a deity. So there are places, not just places, there are people who have had experiences of various kinds of, this spirit or some kind of whether, even if it's scary, the fact that such a thing exists outside of you, at least that is how it appears to you initially, that there is something outside of me here at this specific place that can cause a disturbance. uh, if that can exist, why cannot deities exist outside? They will be outside and they will also be inside. They will be inside when your consciousness changes. In fact, as I said, finally there is a state, and it's a very high state, where the deity enters into the body of the upasaka and stays there. The body becomes a yantra, the mind becomes a mantra. Such an individual at that high state, whatever he says is automatically going to fulfill, because his words become siddha, his actions become siddha. So that is uh, one way of looking at it.
Our deities actually, you said that they become, the consciousness of the universe itself. But I have also heard in many instances in my conversations that deities are actually limited, or so you can't go to Saraswati for and worship Saraswati, a vigraham at least, and ask for, I don't know, winning a war, for example. You have to go to the right deity for the right purpose and cause. And so, can you help elaborate this a little bit?
Yes, so this is the first basic way in which you approach a deity. And I'm here by deity, I mean only the major deities. I'm not talking about, there may be smaller, minor deities also in various realms of existence. So these major deities, they have their own domain, they have their own specific uh, areas in which they are extremely competent, and in which they, if you approach the specific deity, if you approach that specific suppose you approach a deity of war and you need victory, then that is the right way to do about it. Now, suppose you want to realize the deity completely, it is very much possible for whatever the deity is, one specific deity, be it Shiva, be it anybody else, to take you also into the higher pantheons, higher, let's put it, higher registers, higher frequencies of the same deity, where you may see a certain oneness of the deity everywhere. So there is an Advaitic experience that comes specific to that deity, and that is a very rare thing. I mean, I'm saying only that it comes at a very high level. It's not that simple. Neither will it come on day one to anybody, or it may take many lifetimes of upasana. So, for example, there's a deity of war, but what is war exactly? It's a strife. There is a conflict going on. So, if you have that Advaitic experience of the deity, you may actually see that right from the moment life has come to this plane, to earth, till now, until the end, there is always at every level, from the microcosmic level to the cosmic level, the universal level, there is always a friction, there is always a war going on, there is always a struggle. So it is this principle that is governed by the deity. It is this deity who is governing everything. And then you feel a certain kind of oneness with that. You understand that the deity is so universal, it was way beyond what you can imagine. It was there even before perhaps even the earth was created. The deity was there, and it will be there tomorrow if the earth vanishes. That principle is there. So in this manner, a deity can initially, yes, initial approach of a deity is very much, it's possible to approach them for a specific gain or specific desire what you have, and that is actually true for all polytheistic systems of upasana, whether it's Hinduism. I mean, I don't know if polytheism is the right word for it, but basically where there are multiple deities. So whether it's Hinduism, whether you look at the classical civilizations which were before the Abrahamic civilizations came in the West, it was all the same concept, that you approach a deity, and the deity has a certain ability, a certain function in the universe, certain domain in which it is supreme. And if you approach that deity in that particular domain and you need a benefit, so you approach them with a specific manner. There are certain things the deity likes, certain things the deity dislikes. Accordingly, the upasana method is designed by people who have the capacity to see that, and you do the upasana and you may get some benefit from the deity. What is beyond deity? Yes, there is something not beyond exactly, but there is a principle which is completely detached from everything. You call it, whether you call it the Atman, whether you call it the Brahman, or whether you call it fate, or whatever name you can put to it. Yes, there is something which is detached, absolutely, and that is beyond, or you can call it the absolute. And if you look at the Shaiva tantric systems, let's call it the Parashiva, the Parabhairava, or somebody who's way beyond everything. Only question is that how are you going to approach that entity? Suppose there's a being like that who has no attachments to anything. Your and why will you even approach that deity? The first that supreme entity. What is it that you want to gain out of that? Only reason you can gain, only thing that you can gain out of that supreme entity, whether it's Brahman or etc., is to gain the perspective of absolute objectivity, and that brings absolution. Any absolute idea also brings its own benefits. For example, certain sense of immortality inside, a certain uh, going beyond the conditions of the material plane, sort of.
Or simply the idea of moksha. For example, Ramana
No,
Maharshi,
no.
the
What?
constant repetition that there is no other. So
No, no. That is not required here. My point is that suppose you enter that an equation with that kind of an entity, that is fine. But then the next day you cannot say that why are Hindus being persecuted? Why this is that? That thing doesn't care whether you survive.
yeah.
So you cannot have at one point. This is the problem for a lot of people. I see that specifically those who have a little bit of understanding of, because Vedanta is very popular these days and it's widely read, etc. So they want to worship the Supreme, very good, but at the same time they are worried that why am I not getting the job? Why is my community facing this problem? So if you have that kind of a consciousness, why this is happening, why that is happening, then your worship of that entity is anyway failing. वो तो हो ही नहीं रहा है. So in that case, and given this understanding, the rishis and the great masters, they had this graded system of upasana. You start with something that is more relevant for you. You are in class 1, but you directly want to give PhD level exams, so you're going to fail. So this is how you go in a graded system. And the same deity, specifically in the tantric perspective, suppose you're worshipping Kali, at one point Kali herself will become that principle as your own condition changes.
If a person in sadhana is deeply connected to the mother and worships her, would that automatically make him her Shakta Upasaka?
Yes,
Like,
if you're worshipping Shakti, then then you are a Shakta Upasaka. But it is important to understand that you are a Shakta by your disposition. Whether you're an Upasaka or not, that we have to see. Shakta by disposition is somebody who is deeply connected to the divine feminine, the divine mother. Okay, whatever form of the mother. But connection to अच्छी बात है, तो first stage हो गया. Even remember that even the greatest of siddhas had to pass through the system of upasana because it is difficult. It is not easy. Just bhakti is not enough. If bhakti were enough, then the deity would appear in front of you at this very moment. If your bhakti was that pure, if your jnana was that pure, if your vairagya was that pure, because it is not pure, that is why you are a human being. That is why you have to go step by step, working on yourself as well as following the paths recommended by people who have actually walked the path and succeeded. That is why the upasana comes in. So you become a Shakta upasana when you follow the Shakta systems. And you become a Shakta tantric upasana when you follow the tantric systems of upasana. So that is the technical difference, if you ask me.
so follow-up question by the same person. Please say something about Ma Kamakhya. And I would just sort of add that if you could talk a little bit about the menstruating cycles of the Kamakhya Mandir. It was very intriguing. We had a talk by Sinu Joseph on Kamakhya Mandir, and she talked about it. That seemed so bizarre, and it's probably commonplace. But to deracinated people like myself, I guess it seems very bizarre. So if you could reflect a little bit upon that.
So Kamakhya is, in my personal opinion, perhaps the most powerful of all Shakti Pithas, most powerful. There is no limit to what Kamakhya is. And whatever I can say is perhaps maybe 5%, 10% of what the deity really is, living deity. And I'm saying that one is that, from a distance you have some theoretical knowledge, ki aisa hai, this deity, etc. And another is to enter into the mandala of Kamakhya and actually see how she works. Then it's a fascinating thing. This is a temple with which I've been, I think perhaps first time I visited was in 2013. And there's not been a year when I haven't visited Kamakhya, and sometimes multiple times in a year. So Kamakhya, first of all, is a very, very old temple, very old temple. I mean, forget the main structure, the Garbhagriha. I was reading somewhere, I think scientists from the Guwahati University and all had done some testing, and the stones in that near the Garbhagriha and all that. So it is at least close to 2,300, 2,500 year old place. So at that specific spot, for such a long period of time, there was a conception that there is a huge amount of tremendous presence of a great deity, and Shakta deity. It's Shakti, there's no doubt about it, form of Shakti that is there. And let's call it Mahamaya without going to differentiation. And then we find that by 9th century, the Kalika Puran that was composed was from around the Kamakhya temple. It considered Kamakhya as a deity who is both Kali as well as she is also Tripur Sundari. And this is the uniqueness of this deity. Now, after few more centuries, there were more tantras specifically written for Kamakhya, not just written. I mean, there are tantras which are sections devoted to Kamakhya. You will see that the deity of Kamakhya, if you see a typical image of the deity, you will find Ma Kamakhya as having 6 different faces, and there are 12 arms. Okay, and she sits on a lotus, and the lotus comes out of the navel of Shiva, and Shiva is lying on a lion. So this whole iconography of the deity was basically the 6 faces are 6 different deities who are inside one, which means basically Kamakhya can be worshipped as Tripur Sundari, can be worshipped as Chamunda, can be worshipped as Durga, etc., etc. 6, and each of them have their own complete system of worship and method of upasana. Now, the name Kamakhya became more popular because it is when the deity turns into her form as Kamakhya, which is one of the 6 forms, that is when she becomes a boon giver, which means anything that is asked of her in that state. Kamakhya is a particular state. When she acquires that state of Kamakhya, whatever you ask, you will be getting that. That is the first principle. But it is not that simple as it sounds, the way I'm putting it. So it requires a lot of upasana. And the central place of Kamakhya is basically there is no vigraha inside. It is a cave, and inside the cave there is a water that flows out. It is inside that cave, inside that water that flows out. That is where the deity is. So that's why there are certain terms which are used in tantras. So she is referred to as the Avyakta Vigraham, which means that one is unmanifest. She is a deity who is unmanifest. Yes, there is a Utsavamurti of Kamakhya if you enter the main temple, but the main deity where it is there is basically it's not. There is no vigraha there. There's a cave and there is a water flowing, and that is where she is. And there is no. It is in the atmosphere inside that cave that she sits. Somebody who has the subtle vision may perhaps even see the deity, and those who don't, they go there, do namaskara. And interesting thing about Kamakhya is that you don't do normal in other places. You fold your hands and do namaskara. Here, it is important to touch that water and take a sip of that water. That is the way. Sparsha darshan is the thing. You have to touch that deity and that water. Now, where Kamakhya, why it becomes so important in Shakta Tantra is because Kamakhya is known as the Yoni Pitha. Yoni Pitha means basically it is where creation starts in one sense. That is the beauty of this is that any kind of Shakti Upasana of any deity, any form of Shakti, whether it is the highest, the para forms, or whether somebody so inclined to worship yoginis or somebody so inclined to worship the yakshinis or any of the form, any female form of deity can be worshipped in and around the Kamakhya temple. That is why it was so prized even before and even now. The other thing is, as you mentioned, Kamakhya, because it is the Yoni Pitha, the other thing that was noticed is that for a few days in a year, the water that comes out from that cave turns reddish in color. There may be a scientific explanation for this and all that, but the way the tantric perspective of this is that during those 4 days when the water comes out, turns red, it is equivalent to the deity who is having a periods. The temple is closed in that time. There are no fire rituals that can be conducted. In fact, anybody who has any who has been able to enter into the mandala of this deity, and it is not that simple minded. There are it's a belief among the Kalipula tantric upasakas across North India. Those who have any connection to Kamakhya is that the deity tests the sadhak very much. Yes, the deity will put tests on the path, and if you cross those tests, only then you will be able to go higher and higher. And that is also because Kamakhya is basically in one way, if you look at it, there is inside near the Kamakhya main temple, there are all the 10 Mahavidya temples also, and all of them are interconnected. They are all forms of Kamakhya. So Kamakhya is like a physical manifestation of a specific level of tantric diksha that is known as the Purnavishek diksha. So once you have the Purnavishek diksha, you have the authority to worship any Mahavidya, because Kamakhya herself turns out changes herself into any of the Mahavidyas. That is a tremendous capacity. Uh, Plus, the process of worship in Kamakhya is entirely tantric. So there is offerings of ritualized alcohol, etc. There are sacrifices. Everything is done as per the tantras. In fact, it was believed there is a story in one of the tantras where Vasishtha actually comes to Kamakhya and he's trying to worship the deity, and he tries for 1000 years and he fails, and he's about to curse the deity then when he hears a divine voice, when he hears the voice of Brahma, his father, because Vasishtha is the mind-born son, and Brahma tells him that you cannot worship this deity in the Vedic way. So he tells him, you go to a place called somewhere perhaps in Tibetan area and all these places, and there you will find a Buddha Rupi Narayan. So this is a Buddha, but not the Gautama Buddha. It is a Buddha of a much earlier era, who is actually Narayan, and he will teach you how to have the worship this deity. So he goes there, and I think that this event broadly is mentioned in many tantras, not just one. So he goes there and he sees that there is this man, sitting down, and he isn't looking particularly very dressed up in the traditional way. And there is in front of him, there is meat, there is fish, there is alcohol, and there are 3 beautiful women around him. And he's stunned and he says that, what will this man teach me? He looks like a individual who has fallen from the path. So he gets very angry. That is when there is a dialogue. There's a conversation that happens. And that man turns out to be the Buddha that he had heard about. And he tells him that how the process of Panchamakara is to be used for worship of certain deities, and why this is a faster and a more appropriate method in the Kali Yuga. Specifically, he says as Kali Yuga will increase, these are the methods which will work much faster than the traditional methods, which will be slow. So after he learns the process of doing the Upasana, and then he goes to not Kamakhya, he goes to Tarapit, which is another temple in Bengal, and he uses those methods to worship the deity, and he attains very fast siddhi. Siddhi here doesn't mean the communion with the deity, sort of. Let's put it that way. So the Upasana of Kamakhya is entirely tantric. Perhaps I don't know if there are too many temples in India where you can say that the system of Upasana is tantric, but Kamakhya is one of them, Tarapit is one of them. So the deity of Kamakhya is like a many-sided mirror. I mean, this is not something which is mentioned in text, but this is perhaps a realization that people can have if you connect with it. So depending on the consciousness of the Upasaka who is trying to approach, she modifies herself and presents herself in that manner. And she can turn into any female form of a deity, any female form. And whether you are worshipping Saraswati, whether you are worshipping Kali, whether you are worshipping Lakshmi, or any of the Mahavidyas, that one deity who is Avyakta, who turns into that and appears to the Upasaka in that form. This is the strangeness and the great power that is Kamakhya.
It's wonderful. Brings me to another thought, Rajarshi, that Greeks have their own ideas of gods and goddesses. Chinese have their own. I was watching about Chinggis Khan, and he actually used to have visions of Tengri, who's the blue sky Devi. So in our tradition, why do we not have access to those deities which are part of other traditions? Are there different deities in every tradition, or are they simply energy forms and we are creating them based on our traditions? Or that sort of brings me back. Yeah. Please.
There are some deities which are perhaps universal in multiple cultures. Universal because they appear in different cultures, but there is always some modification on based on the specific kind of people, the society that is trying to approach the deity. Deities do modify themselves. It is not that deity, the iconography of a deity, how does it actually come about? So there is, say, for example, Kamakhya, and just to give the same example. So here is the text mentioned at one point that she's a Vyakta, so she's unmanifest. At the same time, when doing an upasana, there is a specific form of Kamakhya. And in fact, many forms. I'm just saying one of the main, majorly known forms where she has 12 arms, and there are weapons in each of the arms, and there are 6 faces, and she sits on a lotus, and etc. So, how did this iconography, in fact, come about? This comes about when there are people who are very advanced, say call them the rishis or call them the acharyas or something, they are worshipping, and they have an intuitive understanding of the form. And this understanding is also given by the deity herself. She says that this particular form, this particular iconography, if you worship, if you approach, then your upasana is going to succeed. So this iconography of each deity, and each of the iconographies also contains clues to the path that will lead to the deity, which means if a deity has weapons, then there is a more martial deity, and that will require certain approach or certain kind of mantras which are more in tune with the nature of the deity. So these iconographies of deities will depend a lot on what kind of people are approaching them. For example, Shiva is one of those deities. Rudra, the Vedic Rudra, is very easily one of those deities, which is perhaps also there in earlier Indo-European cultures. Almost everywhere, some of the other form of Shiva or Shiva-like deity you will find there. So it is reasonable to assume, and I'm not saying that a complete correlation between every deity of every culture and Hindu deities can be found, but it's reasonable to assume that there are at least a few of our major deities who may have appeared to other, cultures, not monotheistic. I don't know what term to use, maybe polytheistic or heathen or whatever, or the classical cultures. Let's put it that way. So it's very much reasonable to assume that many of the deities who we worship did also appear to some of the earlier cultures, but it had its own modifications based on the people who were approaching. Central energy remains the same. Sri Aurobindo, in one of his writings, I think he writes that whom we worship as Mahadevi Chandi is also becomes Athena to the Greeks. And Athena was one of the deities who used to be worshipped for winning victories and battles and various things in building cities, and someone who is equally wise, things like that. So yes, some correspondence can be done, but that is only up to the scholarly level. So which means that suppose you are a Hindu, you're worshipping this deity, and you find that okay, that deity has a similarity with what some of your deity, you cannot use this method of upasana to approach that deity. It will not work. And if it's an old culture that is already sort of non-existent, its vital power is gone, then rediscovering the methods of sadhana is way more difficult. That is the only experts can do that. Ordinary people can't do that. I mean, somebody of that caliber has to be born in that culture and find out the right way to approach the deity. So all that is more theoretical.
So you're saying that the way of approaching Tengri or Tess, who was the goddess of a river called Tess in Mongolia, those ways of approaching them may have been lost at this point in time, but they could be accessed if somebody had that access.
Perhaps, yes. That's
same for Athena and
yes,
others.
Yes, that's the same thing I'm saying. That to approach them, you'll have to find the way of approach. And because what happens is that that is why the importance of tradition and parampara, because tradition keeps the knowledge alive. It's not just text. Texts are one part. There are certain nuances in the sadhana process, various things. Okay, I have to worship this deity first, and this deity has to be placed at this position, this, etc., etc. This mantra so many times. This whole passing down of the knowledge of the vidya is important and possible only when there is a living tradition. Once that living link is lost, to rediscover that is much more difficult. I mean, you can do a very theoretical discovery. Okay, that there are certain similarities between this deity and then certain similarities between that deity, but it will remain only up till that. It is not going to lead to a realization so easily.
And so, in our tradition, if there were seers who of course, who reach a certain level of perception and ability, they'd be able to access Athena or Tengri as well from our tradition, you're saying?
Sure. I mean, if somebody is of that caliber, definitely. I mean, but another point has to be mentioned. So if a person of tremendous, say a rishi like being is born today, assume who has the capacity to actually uh, connect to any deity anywhere in the world. And I'm saying that honestly connect. I mean, there are a lot of people in my experience. I've found many who are half delusional. Their claims of seeing deities are basically their own Mankai Brahma, reality Nasa Niya. But suppose there is somebody who is genuinely that capable, he or she will be able to connect to deities if the deity is still interacting with the world. It is very much possible a deity may recede in the background and may not want to interact with the world,
Oh, wow.
humans. Yeah,
Oh,
that's possible. It's not, yeah. They have a personality of their own. It's just like human beings have, only their personalities are far grander than ours because they live for almost infinite amount of time from our perspective. Okay. So the
And are
deity may
they,
not.
sorry, then I assume that they would have their own worlds. For example, during one of my conversations on a similar topic with another person I turned to for having such conversations, we spoke that all these JNU walas and talking about Durga being this Aryan and killing a Dalit Mahishasur, all this nonsense that they've been peddling. He actually mentioned that we got to impress upon our courts, for example, that these are um, situations or incidences not necessarily from the human itihasa, but they are happening from another realm. They are incidents, real incidents perhaps, but happening in a different dimension, in another world which is not
Mhm.
accessible to us. And we are simply people who are interacting with the deities and being able to see or access these incidents and try and bring them in their own lives to recreate what has happened. For example, the killing of Mahishasur.
Mhm.
Uh, what do you have a comment on this? Are
No,
they
I
are
think
they
that's
are they real worlds happenings in a different world?
not a different world, but different plane in the same universe. Maybe that happened some long time ago or something. So again, there are two perspectives of this. A, did it literally happen? Perhaps in some world it happened, and maybe at a very, very ancient time when it is possible even that at a time when this was very few, when only
Pre-human.
selected few, a pre-human or
Maybe.
somebody,
Okay.
something like that. But at the same time, these events have a very huge impact on how, let's put it this way, that the event of that magnitude has an impact in the subtle planes. When a person does the upasana correctly and is capable, etc., he can again see the whole incident happening in his mind's eye. But this is not an illusional, it's not imagination. So I'm imagining, the text says that now the goddess has taken a weapon and is killing somebody. So I'm imagining, imagination here. It requires a different kind of mind. Your normal mind cannot access that. Plus, each of these also have internal correlations. A story of a deity is a story that has happened outside, that can be accessed even now, even though it has happened outside, and it is also something happening inside. It is happening. All these three are realities. It is not that it is A is reality. If it is outside, then it cannot be inside. No. It is happening all these three at the same time. And that is why the method of upasanas that have been designed for people and things like that are so brilliant, because they take into account, there is, let me put it this way, the Hindu system understands human psychology better than any other system in the world. It knows what is it that is required to make a psychological change in an individual. How does it work on the mind? How does it work on the tattvas? How does it change your perspective of things, etc.? So instead of going into the complexity and intellectualizing too much, they say that, okay, you start doing it first. You read the Devi Mahatmya, you do it in a particular way. Okay, you have to do the Devi Mahatmya, you take an initiation, you chant this specific mantra so many times. Then you sit every day and you keep doing this for 40 days, 2 months, 3 months, and then see if you have an experience. Then see for yourself if the date is inside or date is outside. If you have a genuine experience, you'll never forget. Not in 100 lifetimes also. It will become planted inside your soul. A genuine experience in one day. So like
I've
this.
I've heard other speakers also say that the relationship has changed. It's as if they are real. Even while doing my daily upasana, it's as if I'm interacting. I don't see, but it's real. It's part of me. Very beautiful. Of course, I have no experience of that, but I just want to go back and ask a sort of a related question, just for reaffirmation. So all the sadhana of deities in like a graded system you mentioned is for human well-being. Would that be accurate to say that if
No,
we
no,
want to win a war, if we want to do
no, no, not necessarily. Human well-being is only a side effect of the upasana. It is the secondary part, and upasaka does not only enter into the. And I am specifically talking about the tantric system. Your aim is to change yourself. There is nothing fantastic about being a human being. Okay, let's first understand the basic concept. Right from the moment humans came through the process of evolution until now, for every good that humans have done as a species, there's a lot of negative things that you have done because we are an insecure species. And the understanding is whatever system you follow, whether Hindu, this, that, etc., there is something not proper, something that needs modification, something that needs improvement in the human condition. So the whole point of Vipassana is to go beyond the human condition. And to go beyond the human condition, one system says, okay, you attain moksha, which means you don't have to come back here. Baat hi khatam ho gaya. Some other system says, no, I want to live here, enjoy the benefits, but I want not to be like a human being. How does that happen? A deity enters into you. Suppose you have gone to a very high level, then you are not you anymore. Your thoughts are not yours. Your action is not you. A deity living among human beings is an entirely different thing than a human living among another human being, a society of human beings. The whole point of stress, of striving, of desire, wanting something, failing to achieve that, ये क्यों नहीं हो रहा है, वैसे क्यों नहीं जा रहा है, this, that, etc. That whole thing swept aside. It doesn't think like that. It is entirely different. Of course, I'm saying that is the end step. It's not something that will come right on day one.
if tantra is a quick, even though difficult path, why haven't all sincere seekers chosen it over yogic sadhana or bhakti sadhana?
So, first of all, the whole reason why so many paths are given is because there are different tendencies in people. See, this is the beauty of dharma, the beauty of the rishis who propounded the various dharmas. So they knew that there are various methods of sadhana, there are various processes, and depending on which individual is capable of what, based on his inner propensities, on the things that he may have done in past lives, his actions, etc. There's a certain orientation he will have. So he chooses which path suits him. So because Tantra is a very fast path, and there is no doubt about it, but every fast path also has certain not negatives, but you have to be cautious. So you can drive your car very fast, but unless you're a very good driver, you may also make some mistake, and that can lead to an accident. So taking all these things into account, somebody who is fit for Tantra will always end up in Tantra. And those who are not fit for it, or those who do not have a liking for it, there are a lot of people who are there who may not like this. They may like something else. They may like doing Vipassana in the Bhakti mode or some other system. So they'll go to that. I mean, this is why there is a democracy of paths given.
Regarding Nam Japa, for maintaining counts, which mala should be used for different forms of Shakti, Shiva, Vishnu, and his avatars, Ganpati and Surya? Can Rudraksh mala be used for all, or is there any specific protocol to be followed? I'll just add a sort of additional question. I think this is the Panch Mahadevatas who are being spoken about here. And I have a slightly connected question. Isn't Skanda worship also, or Skanda considered also part of um, the five main deities, the major deities? So maybe connected, but
Yeah, definitely. Skanda is, in fact, at one point his worship was very popular across India. Now it is confined to the south, but definitely is one of the major deities. And not just the five major, but the concept of the five deities comes specifically from Advaita tradition. There are other traditions also. Yes, definitely, Skanda is one of the major deities among Hindus. And regarding the question of malas, on an average, any worship of Shiva or any form of Shakti or somebody belonging to their pantheon can be worshipped using either Rudraksha or Sphatika. For Vishnu, there are various other malas. Tulsi malas are there and different other things. But this is the basic concept. Malas can also be changed depending on there are certain specific mantras of Shakti which will work very well with certain other kinds of mala. For example, if you are worshipping uh, Baglamukhi, for example, one of the Mahavidyas, it is very good to use a mala made of haldi, something that is yellow, or of even of yellow hakik, etc. There are certain prayogs, certain sadhanas of certain forms of chandi which work very well if you use a mala made of red coral. So like that. So these are, as a basic rule, yes, Rudraksha malas are very good for most Shiva, any Shiva related form, any Shakti related form. Spatik mala is also very good. But if there's a specific sadhana you want to do, it is always best to check with your guru.
So we could actually get into worship of maybe some form of Devi to actually solve problems, say in our country, for example, or to set a right direction for our country. If many of us would do it, or how would that work? Because we did talk about this in the context of that. If you want to talk about Brahman finally, then that has no. You said that there's no interest in whether you survive or not.
Yes.
Correct, as Hindus, for example. So as a corollary, if we want that to happen, then perhaps that could be done by accessing Devi worship.
In theory, yes. In practice, the difficulty is that you have to be of that caliber. You find people of that caliber. See, it's like that. What I talked about, why the gradation of adhikaras is based. So what can be achieved by a very high caliber upasaka, even 15 to 20 high caliber upasakas, 1,000 average caliber upasakas will not be able to get it. Where do you find those 15 high caliber upasakas? It is not that simple. कि आज चालू किया कल से जाके हम कुछ कर देंगे सब दुनिया बदल जाएगा. If that were that simple, then the world would have changed by now. So and obviously there's a lot of political aspects involved in this and that, but purely from the sadhak's point of view, let's put it this way, that sadhana is not at all easy. It requires a tremendous amount of sacrifice. It sounds very nice from the outside. The moment you enter, as you go deeper, you have to keep sacrificing things from your material life. Sacrifice is the key word for progress in sadhana. Without sacrifice, you cannot go. And sacrifice is not just internal sacrifice of your circumstances, of things, various, etc. Only then you are at a position where you can say, okay, I will do this ritual and this deity will come and help me out. And not just me, it will help all my people, etc. So the first step is perhaps to create good quality upasakas. That itself is a difficult thing, in my view.
In multiple posts of yours, you have specifically cautioned against directly doing homas, as against propagated by few others, I'm guessing. Can you explain your position on this?
Yeah, I have been clear on this for quite some time. So there is no, whether it's a tantric system or whether it's Vedic system, there is absolutely no scriptural sanction for doing homas without doing japa. In fact, specifically in the tantric system, tantric upasana, shakti upasana, not just tantric, shakti upasana. So the idea was that you do japa, and then you do a 1/10 of that japa count, what you complete, you do homa into the fire. 1/10 of that you do into you give tarpana to the deity, just like you give tarpanas to pitras, you give tarpana to the deity, and then you do something known as marjara or abhishekam, depending on the deity, a little bit of differences, and then you feed people, 10 people or something like that. Only then the mantra system works properly. Then why is it designed this way? Because in this manner you will go through each of the chakras and each of them will get activated. Now if you, apart from japa, every other of these processes, whether it's a homa, whether it's tarpana, whether this or that, if you keep overdoing them without any checks and balances, initially it may feel very good, eventually it is going to bring you down. Bring you down means it's going to cause confusions, it is going to cause obstacles in your path. The prime example of this is, till date I've never found a single person who has violated this basic krama of upasana, or not done japa, for example, and done something else, whatever it may be of the 5. These are called the angas, the limbs of mantra sadhana. Mind you, all of them are mantra sadhana. Whether you're doing a homa, the moment you're adding a mantra, adding swaha to the name, it is a mantra sadhana that you are doing in fire. So if you do a mantra sadhana in fire or water or some other tattva, and you keep activating it without balancing it with the other tattvas, initially it is like having steroids. Initially your system will feel amazing. Only later on it is going to cause a significant amount of damage. And the prime reason why I say this is, another reason is that I have not found a single individual who has violated this scheme and taken to any exclusive worship through any of the tattvas apart from japa. Japa is different, and attain to the highest. I mean, so the situation becomes like this, that you are theoretically saying that I want to go to the Himalayas, but you really don't know if you will reach there because your Google map is not showing clearly. because there's nobody who has actually taken your path and reached there. What has happened is people have taken the path through the angas of sadhana, which is all of them, which is japa, 1/10 homa, and this and that you do. This is the process of mantra purushcharan, which is called, or the limbs of mantra sadhana. Through this, people have attained to the highest state. So, which means that this is the path that has worked for people. But that path, leaving everything aside, taking one, say Homa, for example, and endlessly doing, there is not one single example that I've seen of anybody till date who has attained to highest state of Upasana by only merely doing this. Not one example. Everybody, but Japa can do that. Japa is a different thing because there is a process in Japa. What it does is that if you keep doing japa intensely at a certain point, and if you have certain abilities, it takes you to a meditative state, and it can also make you access the Akash Tattva, which cannot be accessed so easily by the other systems of Upasana.
What's the importance of Akash Tattva?
Akash Tattva is what takes you to closer to the deity. Let's put it that way. Without the Akash Tattva, you will not attain to the higher states. So japa is, that is why japa is so important. But apart from that also, this is the inner significance. Apart from that also, when you're doing mantra upasana, if you're doing japa, you create a form of the deity through japa. And this is something that is experiential. You can see that. And then you add the mantra to each of the tattvas, which is you do a bit of it to the fire. And see, this is how it is beautifully designed. So 1/10 of the count of japa is enough. That amount of invocation of fire is enough, because fire is very aggressive. Fire is a fantastic thing. I mean, using homas is a terrific thing, but only if you do it in the right manner. So adding fire adds shakti to the form that you create through japa. And then using water and finally feeding people is the last step. Why you feed people? Because if there is any mistake that you might have done to any of the processes, by feeding, and not just any person, specific to the mantra you are doing. So if you are doing, you can feed Brahmins, good, Brahmins who follow the acharas and who do their upasana properly, not just Brahmins in name and not doing anything. Usse koi fayda nahi hoga. If you find that kind of Brahmins who are still strictly following their, the regular upasanas that you're supposed to do and the kind of lifestyle that is required, if you feed those people, you will get some blessings out of that feeding. And that blessings is going to counteract any mistake that you might have done in any of the other limbs of sadhana. So japa is fundamental. If you can't do anything, do japa. That is the basic. But if you want to do all the 5 steps, then first is japa, then you go to fire. And then, in fact, in the tantric systems, they won't, in traditional tantric sampradayas, they won't even let you do homa until you reach a certain level of mantra japa, because it eventually becomes counterproductive. That is the accumulated wisdom for centuries of sadhana. So somebody out of the blue coming and claiming that we can reverse that process, and specifically when there's no evidence that that kind of taking one thing out of context has resulted in something genuine, so that makes it a very suspect thing in my opinion.
We come across many people who actually do homas, especially from, say, the Vedic tradition, for example.
No.
And so that is different, totally different.
No, even then also. So fire itself has various categories of sadhana. So if you're doing a Vedic yajna, which is the larger thing, that is different. The people who participate in Vedic yajna, first of all, it is not a daily occurrence. You don't do a Vedic yajna daily. You may do an Agnihotram daily. Agnihotram is different. So you have to understand what kind of fire you're speaking of. So if you're doing a larger Vedic fire ritual, it requires an engagement for certain period of time, say 5 days, 10 days, 3 days, or whatever it is. And it requires people who are specially qualified. End of the day, that is a thing you or me cannot do that. It is only those who are qualified, because it requires a lot of technical processes, etc. So that is what a Vedic yajna is. It's a larger thing. Not everybody can do that. Let's put that, at this moment in India, I believe not more than 10 to among even the Brahmins also, let's put it that 10% maybe, who know the processes how to do that, and they still do it. I read in newspapers sometimes some of the major Vedic yajnas have been performed, etc. That is one thing. Then there is the Agnihotram, which is, Agnihotram means daily fire ritual, little bit of. Here the catch is, for doing Agnihotram, there are specific amount of mantras that you do. It's not like I sit and I do a 10-hour Agnihotram. Aisa nahi hota. Specific time you do, specific amount of mantras you do, specific invocations and ahutis you do. And because you are invoking fire on a regular basis, daily basis, you make fantastic changes in your lifestyle to be able to integrate that kind of power. One of the ideal states, for example, if you're really into Agnihotram, first of all, Agnihotram is something that should be done, if you go by the scriptural sanctions, it is to be done only by A, Brahmins, number two, those who have learned it properly. Okay. B, the lifestyle changes are more important. I mean, let's for a moment, if you believe that, okay, let's keep the varna, the caste factor aside. Is there any other problem in Agnihotram? Somebody else randomly who's a non-Brahmin does the Agnihotram. अगर ये question आता है, problem यहाँ पे है कि it requires a lifestyle change because fire is very powerful. Lifestyle change to the extent that you are not allowed to eat food that is not cooked either by you or your wife or your mother. You cannot just go out and have कि आज तो restaurant में जाके खाना खाते हैं. That is not allowed if you really want that system to benefit you. So that is why these things were put in place, so that it's a whole integrated process. You follow that process if you lead that kind of lifestyle. Yes, then it is a fantastic thing. But I suppose each one has to ask himself honestly whether they are able to do that, and that is only for Agnihotram. Suppose you change Agnihotram into a Homa. Homa is where you are actually invoking deities. You are giving mantra ahutis of the deities, and if you keep doing it day in and day out, it's the same thing. It's like steroids. Initially, you'll feel fantastic. After a few years, you'll not progress anymore. You'll lead to a whole lot of other confusions in and around you in your
Does
life.
it harmful, or you're saying
In my
not
opinion,
progress?
In my opinion, from the spiritual perspective, it is harmful. I mean, if you are spending so much time, you might as well do it in the way where people have done it and actually achieved something.
Yeah, so it's blocking further
It will
progress,
block.
but not.
I
like,
myself have done a lot of homas, so I know what I'm talking about. And then I had gone to, when this realization came to me that this process does not work, I actually went to different really accomplished people in different parts of India, both south, north, etc., whom I didn't know, but I went to them, I saw them, etc., and I was convinced that they are people who have attained to something higher, much higher than what I have at that moment. And I asked them the same question, and they gave me exactly the same answer. If you're not doing japa and if you directly keep doing homa, you will never ever progress.
It's like Vasishtha you mentioned, who for 1,000 years at Kamakya. Vasishtha you mentioned?
That was, yeah,
very
Rishi
similar,
Vasishtha.
Yeah.
Okay. Sort of, but my that's why whenever the one advice I tell people, follow the scriptures that are followed in your tradition. The more you innovate, the more it is going to cost you someday or the other. Because the scriptures, even if you don't look at it as a divine revelation, that is the best way to look at it. Tantras are revealed by Shiva himself, so that gives it authority above everything else. Well, that's why they are Siddha. You can look at it as the accumulated wisdom of thousands of people for long centuries of upasana. So, I mean, seriously, this is the question, this is the answer which I gave to somebody some days ago. If there was a shortcut method to attaining the same thing, say if I do only homas, then I will attain. Don't you think people centuries ago would have already adopted that? I mean, they were far more committed to upasana than you can be in this age. So, boils down to the point that eventually follow the tradition, and that is the safest bet to actually achieve to some actual spiritual growth.
And connected with this is mantra japa. So could we pick up any mantra? You also said that mantras only work when, especially in Shakta Tantra, when you are initiated. But could I pick up a mantra, or even in, for example, when you're doing meditation on chakras, there are supposed to be deities and mantras or syllables, bij mantras associated with them. Could you pick up those and do it? Would they benefit, or would they become a hindrance because you're not initiated?
In my view, Bija mantras should not be picked up randomly. Okay, unless you are very sure what you're doing and you have somebody to guide you properly. Point number one. Point number two is that if you want to chant something, so the name of a deity does not require initiation, which means suppose you want to say, just chant the name of Shiva. Okay, Om Namah Shiva, for example.
But say Om Jayanti Mangala Kali Bhadra Kali. That's available in our daily.
That one. No. You have to understand that. What is available in small prayer books, etc., leave it aside. I am talking only about what is authentically accepted. And why I am saying this is because, as I mentioned just to the previous answer, the closer you stick to the tradition, safer you are. आज पता नहीं चलेगा, पहले दिन लगेगा कि बहुत अच्छा हो रहा है. Suddenly one day there is a problem for which you will not have a solution. This is exactly what happens to people eventually. Because your goal is long term. Your goal is not ki I feel good 2 days and 3 days. You want to become to that suprahuman state. Okay, that is the aim of sadhana. So there are certain mantras which can be chanted and doesn't require any initiation. For example, Nama mantra of a deity.
How do
Okay.
we know? For example, in my temple, I have a book of all the upasanas that you have to do, from Hanuman Chalisa to everything, and there is Om Jayanti Mangala Kali over there, or Om Bhrim Sri.
So
Yeah.
so
So I don't know whether I should do it or not do it.
no, I'm not. This is a generic conversation. First of all, I'm not saying anybody you do this or you don't do this. That is up to your conscience. That is up to you or the advisors who may advise you, etc., whom you look up to, etc. So this is I'm giving a broad general knowledge of how ideally it should be.
Sure.
About that sloka, Jayanti Mangala Kali, this is specifically mentioned that this particular sloka can be chanted without initiation. So anybody can chant this one. In fact, it recommends that for a person who is during Navratra period specifically, if he doesn't know anything else, they can keep chanting this as much as possible, which means that you can sit at hours and hours and do chanting of this. This is allowed, provided, of course, there's a basic criteria you have to determine. Say you are a person who doesn't feel any connection to Kali, you feel a connection to some other form, etc. Then to such an individual, if you give this mantra, it may not produce a result, or it may produce a counterproductive. It may turn counterproductive. So that basic idea has to be there. Okay, so you like Krishna, so you pick up something from that is more suitable and that is allowed to be chanted without initiation pertaining to that deity. But when it comes to Bija mantras and other things, it is best to take advice. Why? That is because for some people, yes, there may be 10, 15 cases where, first of all, most people chant very casually, which means that they chant, say, 5 times, 10 times. Yes. They do not do it in the method of doing an upasana. Now, same thing if you do it in the form of doing an upasana, say for half an hour or something every day, and so many malas and all that, then the character of the mantra will change. It will start interacting with it. Question is, can you handle that interaction? The methods, the rules are given only because it takes into account every possibility that there is all safeguards are put into place. So that is why. If you violate that safeguard and you just randomly keep picking a mantra and keep doing that on your own in the proper manner, in which is, in the systematic manner, for example, and then tomorrow a reaction of that mantra comes, then the question is, how will you be able to handle it? That is where the question is. That's where the trick is. So that is why, in my opinion, it is best to take a at least not even initiation, at least what is called Upadesham of a mantra before doing it.
That reminds me of a conversation with the one contemporary of Jiddu Krishnamurti, also I think called UG Krishnamurti, and Anand Venkatraman in his talk mentioned this, that he actually goes to Ramana Maharshi and says, "This enlightenment, can you give it to me?" And he says, "I can, but can you take it?"
Yeah, sort of.
It reminds me of that.
Mm.
Okay, anyways, just coming back, so do you have a, maybe you can publish this, the list of all the normal mantras one can chant during, say, Navratri or a daily worship, like Om Jayanti Mangala Kali? Is there a list of such
No,
things that you
I don't
can?
have a list like that. But as I said, the best option is to chant Nama mantras. Nama mantras are basically every deity, whichever deity you like, is going to have a list of 108 names. Chant that. There is no problem in chanting that. Don't add any Bij mantra to it. Don't add anything. Just that. If you keep doing it sufficiently, and sufficient doing it, not once. एक बार से नहीं होता है. You spend sufficient time so that it is at least an hour to hour and a half you're doing it, and you do it for a few months. You will see some result. Some effect will happen from that. And if you also, the other thing is that if you want something more than that, then you have to actually make that effort, which means you go and meet people who are more knowledgeable, who may be in the position of gurus or something like that, and you say that, okay, I want to do this person, and you tell me what is the path. Discourage randomly picking mantras from books, texts, etc., and just doing it on their own. There are things like Hanuman Chalisa, I suppose everybody can do, because first of all, it is not typically a Sanskrit mantra or Bija mantra. It is incredibly powerful, and it uses the bhakti of the individual. That is fine. But if you have to do something more, for example, the Navarna mantra and all that, it is very good to take Diksha, because it may not cause anything, but if it does, then how are you going to handle it? That is the big question.
Yeah, I get it. So you also mentioned that, I mean, the Om Jayanti Mangala Kali, if you have no connection with Kali and you go and worship, it may be counterproductive. So I want to understand this a little bit better, if you bear with me. So on Navratri, for example, there's a temple, South Indian temple near my home. And in North India, we have a shortage of good old temples, or very well done temples, I feel. So we go here, and there is, it's a Kamakshi Devi mandir. If I sit in the temple, which I often do, and just do this some chanting, for example, with Kamakshi Devi of Om Jayanti Mangalakari, you're saying it could be counterproductive because
no, not with this. You have to be very specific. So if you're saying that if you're an individual who does not connect to if you're an individual who does not connect to Kali, and you keep chanting Jayanti Mangala Kali regularly, and say not just 5 minutes chanting may not cause anything. Suppose you do 5 hours chanting, you are very desperate to see what this mantra does. Okay, so you every day spend 5 hours on this for 2 months or 3 months, etc., and you are not ready to face Kali, then it is going to cause a shock into your nervous system. Be very blunt about it. And I've seen that kind of cases also. People taking up mantras which is beyond their capacity and thinking that they will pull it off because they're very brave, etc. It's not that. It's not a question. Is not that you should not do or should do. You should understand where you are and what suits you best, to what degree you can do. And for a thing like Jayanti Mangala Kali, which, as I said, is allowed to be done by anybody, chanted, so that you can safely chant. I mean, without pushing it to an extreme limit. Pushing it to an extreme limit means sitting and doing for 3-4 hours daily. That is an extreme limit. If you're doing that, if you're very serious about sadhana, you'll have to do that someday, whichever mantra it is. The 5 minutes, 10 minutes sadhana never gives any results eventually. It will make you feel good, but it is not going to cause a transformation. Transformation requires more effort.
Assuming an average person with a busy life, average proclivity and commitment towards religion, average capacity to sit down and do mantra japa, and basically average on every parameter, what is the bare minimum possibility of experiencing anything? What time to attain any what is a reasonable time to attain any siddhi that one has to invest, and over how long periods of time?
No, Siddhi is a very difficult thing. Siddhi to chhod do, but experience ke baat karte hain. So whether you can have an experience of a deity, that depends on how much sadhana you might have done in your past life. Busy and all that comes in secondary. I had my first experience when I had not chanted a single mantra. I met my guru, one of my primary gurus, right after that. So it depends on how much you have done in your past life, etc. But on an average, getting one experience is not a big deal. You can get it if you spend 40 days or something like that. But to integrate that experience into your system, into your mind and body, and change your perspective, that is much more tougher. That is going to take, that will take years or decades or even lifetimes. So that is why the guru is important, because the guru makes this decision. He observes you and sees that how much he might have actually progressed in past lives, which is the best path for him, which is the best mantra for him. How much should he do? Or if a person who is not supposed to, enter into the highest stages of sadhana in this lifetime, the guru may give him something simpler to do, something that helps him in the path, something that gives him some amount of material success, some peace of mind. That is enough. So these judgments is for the guru to do, and is based on the individual who is approaching the guru.
Why is it that most of the local village deities are connected to Bhagavati and Bhairava? And also Bhairav becomes the central deity in many places of worship rather than Shiva. Could you explain?
So that is because the tantric systems, especially the Kalikula tantric systems, is Bhairava who is the main deity. As I mentioned in Shaiva Tantra, it is the projection of Shakta Tantra happened from the Bhairava stream of scriptures, from where Bhairava is the the guru, or the one who invokes, who tells you what the tantra is. So Bhairava, in fact, even from the medieval era, the tantric texts all have this format where Bhairava is speaking to Bhairavi. So in that sense, Bhairava is a very, very central figure in tantra. There is no doubt about it, no two ways about it. In fact, the genesis of this dichotomy comes in Kashmir itself, where there was the Kashmiri Shaivism, the Siddhantika stream, which is at one point it was prevalent all across India, and then the invasions happened, and now you have the Shaiva Siddhanta only confined to South Tamil Nadu. There, Sadashiva is the primary deity. and there are various things, rituals, etc., associated with it. Whereas in the non-dual systems of the Kashmiri Tantra, it was Bhairava and Para Bhairava who was considered as the central deity. It is from these systems that you had the projection of what you call the Shakta Tantras and all that. So Bhairava was a very and is a very, very integral part of Shakta Upasana. In fact, there are Bhairava himself is kramas of sadhana. There are certain mantras of Bhairava, you graduate from that to higher mantras of Bhairava, etc., etc. Then there are the Ashta Bhairavas, etc., who are connected to the Ashtamatrikas. Then there is a Vatuka Bhairava whom you have to worship even before you start into proper Shakta, Mahavidya Upasana. He clears the blockages that come in your path, things like that. Apart from this, the Nath Sampradaya, which was there from medieval India, which propagated the Savat Tantras and all that, the Nath Sampradayas used to worship three deities most prominently. One was Hanuman, one was Durga, and the other was Bhairava. So, because of the confluence of all this, Bhairava Upasana has become, I won't say it is very popular, but it is significant in the tantric circles. And also in the village deities, because that is where I suppose you needed somebody as a protector. A protector deity has to be a little bit more aggressive. So Bhairava form of Shiva is more aggressive than the normal, the Sadashiva form of Shiva.
How, if we do not know our Ishta Devta, how do we find out who our Ishta Devta is? Is it simply who we connect with? Or is it
No, initially you
formal?
So formal way of finding the Ishta Devata is the job of the Guru to tell you which deity to worship. And you realize your Ishta Devata only when you have a certain category of experience, not just any experience. Certain category of experience when it comes to an individual, only then he realizes that this specific deity is my Ishta Devata. And then there is a third way, which means if you have with the horoscopic combination of an individual, you can get some glimpse of what nature of deity is best suited for this individual. But I suppose on a practical basis, you initially start with worshipping the deity that you like best. Ishta Devata, you'll get to know eventually either your guru reveals to you or you yourself progress to a situation where you have a certain class of experience, a kind of category of experience. It's not normal experience.
Experience or just a tendency. For example, I mean, I do have a guru, but not a I mean, it's not an initiation from like a guru to shishya in the classical sense of how you may have. For example, Sadguru Jagi Vasudev is my guru, but there the initiation form is very, very different. It's in Shambhavi Mahamudra and given to 1,000 people together. And of course, for me, it has changed me over the last 12, 13 years of my daily meditation, daily Kriya practice. However, it is not like a mantra initiation and general there was a proclivity towards Shiva, for example, and there is a very heavy leaning and orientation in the Isha Foundation towards Shiva worship. So that naturally sort of attracted me towards. So could I actually say that Shiva is my Ishta Devata, or is there a different classification of Ishta Devatas?
No, you can say that Shiva is your Ishta Devata. You like Shiva, that is fine. But what I am talking about when I say an experience, that is a different thing. Where the deity appears to you and connects to your soul. Let's put it this way. And that connection is like a stamp on you. And you will never forget in 1,000 lifetimes. That is a specific category of experience. But that is high up. That is not going to happen easily on day one. It is best, in my opinion, in fact, there is no harm in, there's a specific deity you like. You have a tendency for and you have a liking for it. You want to do Upasana. That's good enough to start. I mean, do not be fixated with, I have to find who is my exact Ishta Devata, tabhi main jaake sadhana karunga. Better than that, start with something. Eventually, the path will reveal to you.
What is the legacy of Tantric Buddhism and the development of Tantric Shaktism in Bengal? Did it influence Vaishnavism as well through Sahajya? Perhaps a related question or a nuance that I had was also that did Tantra travel from India to Tibet and thereby later to got attached to Buddhism, or how is the connection? There is also a question here which also reminds me of another tweet I'd read somewhere of Jagannath Puri being connected with the Tantra traditions. Could you explain all of this?
So these are separate questions, in my opinion, the way I look at it. So
Okay.
first of all, there is definitely some so scholars have their own opinion. There are some scholars who believe that many of the tantric practices we do today, some of them at least, have been taken from the Tibetan Buddhists. But I believe that the majority of them is the reverse, the other way around, which is, for example, the Shaiva Tantras, which was there in Kashmir. Many of those texts, to the extent even some modern scholars believe that not just the text, even the initiation process, etc., was exactly lifted verse by verse, and the deity was changed and then applied to their systems. So, in a way, Hindu Tantra is older than Buddhist Tantra, is what I firmly believe. Has there been an overlap between the two and some influence and counter influence? Perhaps there are two gray areas because there are conflicting views on this. One is specifically with respect to the worship of the deity who is known as Ugratara, who is the second of the Mahavidyas, who was at one point and still is highly popular in Bengal. And she's a fully tantric deity. And Tara is perhaps the most ubiquitous deity in Tibetan Buddhism today, one of the most popular deities. There are 21 forms of Tara they have and all that. So in this, there is some dual opinion. Some believe that it was the Tibetans who took it from the Bon religion, and then the Hindus adopted it. Some believe that no, the Hindus were also parallelly doing Tara Upasana. So I can't confirm one way or the other. It is possible that during the time of the the Pala kingdom, who had strong Buddhist inclination, they were also Shaiva and Hindu Tantra also they supported. It's not like
sorry to interrupt you, but isn't Tara part of the Chaunsat Yogini? So that then would predate Buddhism, would it not?
No. The Yogini Tantras, the 64 Yogini Upasana that came in, for example, started after the Shaiva Tantras. So it is not that the Yogini cult, Yogini Upasana system was older than Tibetan Buddhism. No, they took the Yogini Upasana system from the Shaiva Tantras and they incorporated. We also had, as I mentioned, from the Shaiva system, the Shakta system took the Yogini Upasana, and then the cult of the 64 Yoginis eventually became on their own, a fully set path. Today, that cult has almost declined. The 64 yoginis are worshipped, but as a part of the larger tantric tradition, not exclusively in that sense. I mean, it's there, the temples are there and all that still, but I don't know how much of worship actually happens there today. That vitality is sort of lost in those temples. But Tara, for example, her primary identity today is of a Mahavidya, not as the yogini. So there will be names. See, in the tantric system, it's slightly more different than other systems, and not just different. Actually, there are strong links with the Vedic system also, but that's a different topic. The Mahavidya names will also appear in the yogini list. In fact, in the yoginis, along with the yoginis, you will have, there are other pantheon of deities who will have a similar name as some of the Mahavidyas also. So a deity functions both at a level as a Mahavidya and also as a level as one of the yoginis, and sometimes as an auxiliary deity to another deity. So this is how the system is created.
Tara, can you help explain that? Sorry, Mahavidyas, yoginis.
No, what I'm trying to say is, that, for example, there are the 10 Mahavidyas. These Mahavidyas, some of the Mahavidya deities will also appear among the krama of the 64 yoginis, or in the 8 matrikas, or there is another system that is also used, which is that Ganpati, and there are 16 specific forms of Shakti or worshipped along with Ganpati. So the same deity may appear at all of these different systems and places. Okay, so these whole process, this whole system, whether it's the Ganpati and the 16 forms of Shakti, or whether it is the Dasa Mahavidya, etc. So these, when to worship which one, how does it connect to which of the main form that you are worshipping, etc. These are more technical in nature. It was devised by the acharyas who actually formulated the system. So you worship this deity, along with that, this specific auxiliary deity has to worship this deity, and that auxiliary deity may have its own. If you approach that auxiliary deity, it may be another set of deities where this particular deity may become an auxiliary. So these kind of systems are there fully in tantric pantheon. Coming to the question specifically, it's possible that the Tara Upasana actually may have been influenced by Buddhism, but regardless of that, the method in which we worship is more, we look at it as a Mahavidya, and the worship is very well integrated into the Hindu system. There's no doubt about it. Apart from that, regarding the Sahajiya Siddhas, who were a set of Buddhist practitioners, I do believe that the Sahajiyas imported a lot of the, imbibed a lot of the Hindu tantric systems, and they formed a method of upasana which was, call it a mixture of the Kola system, the mixture of the Panchamakara systems, etc. And that influenced Buddhism in its turn. From there, that is perhaps the only link I can think of between the way Hindu Tantra and Buddhist Tantra interacted. More than that, I'm not very sure.
What is the relation of sex with Tantra? Why is Tantra always shown with sexual practices? What is, and so this, it just sort of goes on about that. But basically, you get that point.
So this comes from
maybe
the
related. Maybe I'll related also, and you may want to answer it together or separately. What are your thoughts on Aghora Tantra, Samshan Upasana, Munda Sadhana? And so, could you elaborate on both of them?
So, so these are two. There is some broad similarities, but still these are two different things. So, in the tantric system, after a certain level of diksha is attained, then you are, in fact, required in the what is known as the Kolachara method of upasana to use 5 different, all the Panchamakaras, and make offerings to the deity. Now, if the question is that are they valid, they're 100% valid for a person who knows what he is doing and he has the right diksha. And mind you, when you are doing these sadhanas, it is not merely a, it is not sex in the normal way that you understand. Neither is it consumption of meat in the normal way or consumption of alcohol in the normal way. There is a whole lot of processes that are involved. In fact, there's significant amount of mantra sadhana that goes into it before you can actually do this. Point number 1. Point 2 is that not everybody, not every path of Tantra actually requires one to do any of these things. There are certain paths of Tantra, certain sampradayas, specifically in the Sri Kula, which are completely known as Dakshinachari Sampradaya, which is where all these processes are either used as anukalpa. Anukalpa means substitutes for these are used. And then the focus is on the standard mantra sadhana, homa, etc. All this is there. So, question is for those practices, those paths, those sampradayas, when they allow these processes, is it beneficial? If the question is if it's beneficial, yes, it is definitely beneficial if a person knows what he is doing. Person is capable of it. It is not indulgence. Remember this, that no upasana ever, any system in the world is indulgence. The moment you think that you are going to enter into this path because it is some, some kind of, it gives you a liberty to behave in the way you do, then you will fall so badly that you won't be at a situation, you'll be worse than the situation where you have started. This is the dictum that the Tantras give repeated, that somebody who is not fit for this enters into this path, because whether he thinks that this is a license to act in the way you want, etc., your condition, that individual's condition is going to be worse than when he had started off. His condition is going to be so bad. And I've seen that literally happening to many people. But if the right individual enters into the path, then every act, the whole basic principle of this is that Tantra is not to be looked at as completely separate from life. So the basic things of life, even that which is considered as tamasic, which is rajasic and all these activities, even through those you will derive an energy, and that energy, that Shakti, you will be able to use it and enter into a communion with the deity whom you are worshipping. This is the basic principle. So there is no question of Tantra is not into that only, I will only worship the sattvic form and I will not worship into the tamasic form, because the deity whom you are worshipping will show her effect through all the 3 gunas. And only a completeness of the tantric upasana happens. And this is my specific view, and this is also mentioned in various scriptures. Completeness of the path happens when you can find that energy from everything and anything. So it is not that only when I am very well dressed and I've taken a bath and I'm sitting in my own puja room and the condition is very good and there's no disturbance, only then I can relate to it. That is fine. But you must also be able to attain that same state of oneness with the mantra devata, if I put it that way, even in conditions which are otherwise considered to be completely detrimental to sadhana. This is the broad philosophy. But apart from that, there are more specifications. For example, there are certain deities whom, if you worship without ritually sanctified alcohol, the results will not be proper. And this is verifiable. It is not a question of should I do this? Should this is right? This is wrong, etc. If you see it, if you see one live demonstration of what exactly I'm talking about, you'll never have this question in your mind.
One question on related to sex. Somebody who has created a Devi temple, and supposedly there is this thought about, or whatever, saying about he having sex with the Devi. What does that mean at all?
My EA is not about any specific sampradaya. So if you ask me that what is followed there, etc., I can neither comment good, bad, anything, because I have no idea. I've only heard the name. But regardless of that, in this basic question, the first fundamental principle of tantric upasana is that eventually you reach a stage where you have to attain a degree of oneness with the deity. So not only do you, for example, same thing, I'm giving to give an example. You are worshipping Bhairava, you attain a state of oneness with the mantra of Bhairava, and Advaita Bhava comes in, you make an offering of a ritually consecrated alcohol. You consume the alcohol. It is not you who is consuming, it is Bhairava who is consuming. And in that state, even if you take a whole bottle and you consume it, there is not going to be even one trace of being a drunkard. किसी को पता ही नहीं चलेगा. Only in that state. Any other state you do, you'll fall down, you'll do all sorts of things that every drunkard in the world does. Same principle applies when you are using sex in the method of sadhana. You are identifying with Shiva. If you're a woman, you're identifying with Bhairav. You're identifying with Bhairava. In that state, it has to be done. Only then it produces the result. So when you're identifying as Shiva, obviously your partner is identifying with Devi. There is no question about it. So it is a person who is completely conditioned with the Puranic way of approaching a deity will find it difficult to appreciate. But this is the fundamental crux of any tantric upasana. Eventually, at the higher level, you identify with the deity and then you perform the act. Only then the act becomes siddha. But it has to be correctly done. Correct identification does not, there should be no trace of the idea that, I'm doing it for because it's some fun and this and that. Then you are 100% going to fall and going to fall very badly.
Regarding the rituals and all the things we are doing, everything, is it some kind of design to invoke the energy, whether it is cosmic energy or universal energy, to or force them to come oblige to our request? Is something like this? Can it be comprehensible within our five senses, or we will have
So, if I get the question correctly, you're saying that are we forcing the deity to come?
I am saying that is it something like I want to draw the parallel between Kunti invoking Surya, something like this. We are making the arrangements like that. That deity is obliging to our request, something like this.
Yes.
In terms of rituals or something like this, whatever we are doing on what I want to say that is there is should be some significance of whatever we are pujas we are doing, rituals we are doing, some the form in the way we are doing. Is it something like this? I just want to reconfirm on this.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, yes, there is one element of it that when you're using a specific mantra, you're actually calling a deity. So, in a way, when you call somebody, there is always a certain amount of force that you're applying. That is why the process, the technical method of mantra, purushcharan, and everything is given if you do it correctly. So, by the original idea was that if somebody is that capable, he doesn't make any mistakes in his upasana. If you follow the method, the deity will be obliged to come to. Deity will come to you because the deity is bound by the mantra. When you're chanting the mantra, basically you are forcing the deity to come near you. But that requires a certain perfection of mind and body, which is not easy in this age. 90% people, 99% people do not have that kind of exact proficiency in upasana that no one is a rishi today that, I will now do this sadhana and the deity has to appear. It hardly works. So what you do is that you follow the rules to the best of your ability. Along with that, you also add certain amount, and that is fundamental, in fact, in Kali Yuga, certain pure devotion to the deity. That you are not forcing also, you are also asking very politely, very humbly, and very sincerely that please appear. When you add these two together, your chances of success will increase. But if you want to, yes, the rituals are in a way designed, actually. You're right in that sense. If you add it, if you go purely theoretical, then some of the rituals are designed in a way that if it is correctly done by the person of extreme capacity, the deity is bound to appear to you. But only question is that capacity and all that has been corrupted in this age. So that method will not exactly work. So what we do is that we still follow the ritual process, because that is the best way to invoke the deity. That is why the mantra sadhana, all that is there. Along with it, you also have certain humility, certain amount of devotion, certain amount of craving for the deity above and beyond all other things, and then there is a reasonable chance that you may succeed.
Could you please suggest ways to increase our individual Shakti for spiritual and material progress? Apart from strict maintenance of brahmacharya, what should we do?
Discipline. Shakti is bound by discipline. You make a rule, for example, that every day at 3 you will get up, until 5 you will sit and do mantra sadhana, and you make that, follow that rule so strictly that even if stage, or maybe you make a rule that this particular mantra I'm going to chant every day, so with 3 malas, and your discipline is so strong that tomorrow if somebody comes and tells you that uh, you are going to die right today in half, the next day itself, the god of death comes and tells you, let's say, that you're going to die, and you request him that, all right, and there's no problem in dying, but give me half an hour, I'll just finish this mantra and then I'll die. If you have that kind of discipline, you will succeed. But most people, and not just succeed, that is, discipline is the key to creating Shakti. There are 3 levels of Shakti, which is, one is to generate Shakti, one is to integrate it into your mind and body, and third is to apply it. Each of them are progressively more and more difficult. First stage is just generation. Generation requires serious discipline. Integrating requires even more discipline. And application to wo chhod do, wo baad mein aata hai. Only problem is, a lot of people want to go directly into the application path, and then what happens is you make mistakes.
About Gayatri Mantra, I heard from a friend that he was doing it, he was mentally chanting it, not doing verbally. So, does that work if we chant it mentally, or it has to be chanted verbally only?
So this applies not just for Gayatri, I mean, this applies for all mantras. Perfect mental chanting of a mantra at the initial stages is near impossible, because you will require exceptional concentration. Concentration is again a byproduct of Shakti. So how much Shakti you have, if you, what most people do is that they don't chant it out loud, but there is lip movement and all that. So I suppose in the initial stages that is fine. Eventually, as the mantra gains more power, as your mind and body transforms a bit, you will be able to chant even without moving of lips, without any sound. It's entirely, absolutely mental chanting. And in that state, if you can chant a mantra, the power will be tremendously great. But most people will not be able to do that for a longer mantra for any sufficient period of time, which means that you may be able to do 10 counts or 15 counts, and then you will feel like, okay, let's move the lip or something like that. Or the next day you will feel that, it's taking way too much effort and time. So let me just do it 2 or 3 times, and then your discipline will break. So something or the other will obstruct your flow, unless you are very special from birth, which I'm assuming no one is. So there is no problem in initially chanting with slight movement of lips. After you go to a higher state, automatically your mantra will become very silent, and then you will not have to chant so much also. Even one mala will produce tremendous effect if you can really silence your mind, and if you can chant completely silently.
I have a very common man kind of question. From the complete talk, what I could understand is that this whole path is for experience. मतलब सब कुछ experience के ऊपर आ जाता है कि आपको experience हुआ कि नहीं. अगर हुआ उससे ऊपर चाहिए तो ये करिए, उससे और ऊपर चाहिए तो ये कीजिए. There is nothing focus about ये भगवान वो भगवान ये वो. You're demystified it in a very 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 practical way. अच्छा, मैं अपनी ये बात करता हूँ और वही आपसे क्वेश्चन है मेरा म्यूजिक को लेकर के. जैसे ध्रुपद फॉर्म ऑफ म्यूजिक है, उसके थ्रू मुझे कुछ एक्सपीरियंस हुआ जो सर, और जैसा आपने बोला कि वो आपकी आत्मा में बिल्कुल 1000 टाइम्स स्टैम्प कर देगा कि
Correct.
अगले 1000 जन्मों में भी वो आप भूलेंगे नहीं उस एक्सपीरियंस को.
सही बात.
राइट. तो हम एक्सपीरियंस की बात करते हैं, ओनली एक्सपीरियंस की बात करते हैं. तो वो जो एक्सपीरियंस है दैट इज वेरी एडिक्टिव. दैट्स व्हाई I try to learn it, and I try to मतलब practice करने की कोशिश करता हूँ. How to increase that experience? Number 1. Number 2, क्या मेरे लिए म्यूजिक का ही तरीका है या तांत्रिक तरीका भी है?
So there are 2 things here. So as I see it, to increase an experience, the aim of an experience is not to stop at the experience. First thing, the aim of an experience is that eventually, and I'm talking only from the sadhana point of view, because my knowledge of music is negligible. I mean, you will be a better person to explain music to me than me explaining to you. But from the sadhana point of view, experience का aim यही है कि you reach a state where you are in that experience 24/7. 24 घंटा उसी अवस्था में आप रहेंगे. That is realization, which is much higher than experience. To increase the spiritual experience to a realization, or perhaps in the case of music, I'm just guessing, it could be that you have a certain experience. Say you play for a certain amount of time, and then उस समय पे आपका ये experience अनुभूति होता है. You reach a stage where at the ऐसे करके whenever you want it, you can bring that experience onto you. एक बार 5 मिनट में भी आप कर सकते हो. आप उस स्तर पे पहुंच गए हो साधना के, assuming म्यूजिक के साधना भी मान लीजिए. So to do that, there are, at least in the spiritual system, there are a few things required, which is A, discipline, B, patience, because there is experience to realization. Even after the best of your sadhana, there is one thing known as time. Until the right time comes, you will not get it. Nature is not going to allow you. And when is nature not going to allow you? I'm speaking specifically for sadhana point of view. When there are karmic balances you need to pay. For example, you have an experience of a very high state of sadhana, which is, say, a mantra that comes from Shiva's. I was mentioning Lord Shiva has 5 faces. तो उसमें जो ऊपर वाले जो फेस है, which is it's known as the Uddhamna face of Shiva. The mantras that come from them are very spiritual. और उसके भी ऊपर एक है जो दिखता नहीं है, that is called the Anuttarana. So in that state, you basically become like almost like a deity, like a god in that state. लेकिन if you start chanting a mantra like that, what is going to happen is that it is going to cause आपके आसपास में, it's going to cause full disruption into your life until it makes you into that kind of recreates into that kind of a being. Otherwise, what will happen? You will stop that sadhana only on your own, because you will not be able to handle the pressure. So nature has a check and balance mechanism. At an individual level, to increase an experience, you have to keep A, practicing, B, patience. These two are very important, because you cannot control time. Everything requires a certain time. You may have to do 10 years of sadhana, and then suddenly the next day you may get a tremendous experience, and then every day you will keep getting experiences. Then you may think that मैं 10 साल क्या बर्बाद किया, but who knows, maybe that 10 year actually helped you reach that stage. So something like that. And in this, the other thing is that I remember when I first started my sadhana, I was speaking to somebody who was more senior, and he asked me one day कि अगर तुम्हें बोला जाए कि you will not attain anything in this lifetime, so are you going to stop your sadhana? I said no. So he said, so this is what is important, is this is the question that you must ask yourself. कि अगर you know for a fact that you will not succeed, are you going to give up the path? Are you going to say फिर तो ज़्यादा करके फायदा नहीं है? If that is the attitude, you will definitely not succeed. Your attitude towards practice should be like, even if I don't get a single result, I am not going to reduce the amount of effort that I'm putting from my side. If you keep doing this for decades and decades, there is a possibility that at one point you may actually attain a state which is higher than what you are. Your experiences will become more deeper. There is a weightage to the experiences. There's a experience that will translate into a realization. Because realization here aim सब कुछ का. Once the realization comes, then it transforms you. So this is the way is to practice, and the way is to have patience. Because there's no easy route. Especially as you go higher and higher, it's like if you're running a 100-meter race, after the 95, 97 meter, every step will take 10 times more effort. And there, if you give up, you give up. वो किसी को कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता है. Nobody is waiting to give invitation card कि आ जाओ भाई. कोई किसी को, universe doesn't care. It's up to you how sincere you are, how desperate you are. So like this.
So for me, if जो आपने मुझे अभी आंसर दिया, उस आंसर से मुझे जो मेरा आंसर मिला वो ये है कि मेरे लिए म्यूजिक ही पाथ है, not necessarily tantric. Because I've already got that experience.
So if you have got an experience in a path, then you should stick. That means that perhaps either something you might have done in your past life, या कुछ तो है connection. So that is the way to enhance. You should look for enhancing your experience in that path. I'm not saying that you are fit or not fit for tantra, because that judgment cannot be made like that etc. Who knows, maybe years later suddenly आपको कुछ ऐसा हुआ कि you may have an experience in tantra. I'm just speculate करके बता रहा हूँ, मैं ऐसे नहीं बोल रहा हूँ कि ये होगा या नहीं होगा. So like that. But what you have already achieved, stick to that more strongly. If that itself, if there's some other path you're supposed to enter, this itself will take you there if needed.
My question, it was related to events which are related to Devi Shakti entering a person. So I'm from South India, and since childhood I've seen, in Devi temples, that women who enter a trance, sometimes men also, a trance-like state, and then people go and like pray to them, And Hindus, we do believe that Devi Shakti can enter into a person, and this is not a higher level person as you are talking about. These are like simple people. So it's like an altered state of consciousness. So is it possible for a normal person, without doing any of this higher level of chanting and thing, to just have that experience? What would your thoughts be on that?
Definitely. There are certain kind of temperaments it requires in a individual. And in fact, somebody who's an expert, he can actually look at a person and say that whether such a person is capable of having that kind of experience. But this is only a high level answer. There are many more nuances in this. So when we say that there is a divine force or divine shakti that is entering into a person, and what you're talking about, what it state of possession for a certain amount of time, and it's prevalent across India, not just in South. Yeah, I've seen in Maharashtra, I've seen in Bengal, seen in the north in hills and all that. The quantum of force that will enter into the person, the nature of the force, etc. It depends on a lot of factors, but also primarily on the mind and body of the individual who is becoming a vessel of that force. Okay, so this is very important. Not everybody is pure enough to hold very high caliber forces. Sometimes it could be a local deity, sometimes a partial force may enter. Number one, and sometimes this happens very often. If they keep repeatedly doing this, it will have an impact on their body, and some kind of breakdown or something like that can happen. Is this possible? It's very much possible. Is this helpful in the sadhana? That is, if you are doing sadhana. This alone by itself will not make you spiritual. This is like basically one fine day you go and have a good food at a restaurant and you love it, and you every 2 months you go, but you still have to eat your dal and rice at home or whatever regular food you have. Unless you're doing sadhana, if you're properly doing sadhana, and suppose such a person has this kind of an experience, you integrate both this two, then it becomes a powerful thing. Remember, the key to spirituality is some degree of control over the process. If you have no control of what is happening, suddenly something is coming in, something is going out. How do you know that it is not a spirit? I mean, most people will not even understand that if it is a higher level power or it is a spirit that is entering, unless you are an upasaka and you know what the signs are. Spirit can also tell you various things and stun you by revealing knowledge that you think is impossible. All said and done, develop a system of sadhana. As an individual, if you have to enter into any of the paths, you have to have a core system of sadhana that will stand by you through anything in life, whether it is a mystical experience or whether it is a day-to-day life, or whether you are simply having a fight with somebody else, or you are watching some good serial or something like that, whatever. That should become fulcrum of your existence. Once that is there, then that upasana, whatever you're doing, and it's assuming the upasana of a higher deity, whether it's Shiva, Vishnu, or anybody, some of the major deities. Once it is working, once the mantra is working, that mantra is your best friend. It's closer to you than your father, mother, friend, wife, husband, son, anybody. And that mantra is going to tell you, guide you according to its nature, where you have to go, what you have to do. It will reorganize your life if the mantra is correctly working. And then you watch all experiences. You see this kind of an experience, somebody getting possessed. You see some other experience. You learn something from it. You see if it is helpful for you or not helpful for you. And have an open mind and navigate the path. That is how it is. So these experiences happen. Most of the cases, they don't make people spiritual because the experiences that happen to these people are not well digested because they don't have a sadhana regime, most of the people. So it is more organic kind of experience that happens. In another way of looking at it, there is a certain eruption of what is known as the secret force inside every human being, the Kundalini. Partial eruption of the Kundalini, and it identifies with the deity to some degree. And at that moment, that certain amount of extraordinary power comes in. But that by itself is not going to make you spiritual unless you have a unless you follow the traditional. Spiritual, it is hard work. When the mystical aspect, all that aside, it's very, very hard work. If you're not doing the hard work, you will not get the result. This is the bottom line of nature.
Can you follow two different paths at the same time? Like, would you follow the Vaishnava and also the Shakta at the same time? Because you can't just give up. I mean, you can't just give up one deity that you've been worshipping for over many years and then do something else.
So there is no. Why should there be a conflict in the first place? Sure, you can worship two deities. I mean, there are a lot of people do that. I am not getting the genesis of the question actually. What is the conflict?
If you want to continue in the same tradition, I mean, it should be just like this path conflicts with that path, so then you will not be good at both. So keeping.
No, it depends on the caliber of the person. It depends on the caliber of the person. There are people who worship, and in fact, since this talk started off with Shakta Tantra, let's say that Tantra is basically a specific method of upasana, and Tantra recognizes the worship of all Vaishnava deities, by the way. There are full tantric ways of worshipping every form of Vishnu. Every form of Vishnu, in fact. Okay, there are yantras, mantras, this, that. Tantra is a disciplined manner of approach to a certain deity, which maximizes your chances of succeeding. Let's put it that way. Okay. So there is no conflict with worshipping that, I worship Vishnu, so I can't do that. No, nothing like that.
Can one's Ishta Devta override the impact or influence of Grahas? If it is unlikely that Ishta gets involved in overriding Grahas' influence in such a case, what is the scope of Ishta Devta's role in conjunction with unfolding of karma as devised by Grahas?
When I was talking about Ishta Devata initially, I think a couple of questions back or something, there is something I mentioned where I said that Ishta Devata is Ishta Devata once you have that experience, a category of experience. These were my words when I said there's a category of experience that it happens. Ishta Devata makes a stamp in you, and that stamp it's a different thing. It's very difficult to explain verbally, basically, that you create a very strong bond, and that's not a verbal bond. There is an experiential bond that happens. Once that happens, then the Ishta Devata, it doesn't override the grahas, but it brings solutions to things. Let's put it this way, in a way which an ordinary Jyotishi, if he or she were to see the chart of an individual who is being guided by the Ishta, will not be able to predict easily what is going to happen, because the Ishta's power is far more than the grahas, number one. That is provided you have that kind of an experience with the Ishta Devata. Most people have a very mental idea of Ishta Devata. I like this deity and I like that deity, and etc. etc. In that case, the deity is not going to enter into your karmic stream and cause a difference unless you specifically design a sadhana and do that. In which case, you can do it not just for Ishta, for any deity you can.